Welcome to the Writing Gym Podcast. We're here to pump up your writing. And now your host, Andy Brixey, personal trainer at the Writing Gym.
Hey there, writers and muse daters. Today, I talk with Annalisa about accountability, why it's important, how the right kind of accountability can accelerate a writer's progress, and the wrong kind of accountability can stop a writer in their tracks. We discuss the neuroscience behind the Writing Gym and how we help writers to master their fear.
So Annalisa, today let's talk a little bit about accountability. You know, we talk about accountability as in following up with people and making sure that they're meeting their goals, but let's talk specifically about how that works for authors. Why is it so important, according to neuroscience, to have that accountability in a writing program?
That's a really good question, Andy. And it's really not about whether or not you do or don't have accountability. It's really more about what kind of accountability you have. And this makes a lot of sense for those listeners out there who saved that term paper until the night before. And what did that feel like? It was stressful. And some people are really driven by that adrenaline and that stress, but it's highly likely that that wasn't the very best representation of their work, whatever the project was that was handed in at the last moment. That kind of accountability is stressful, and it's not helpful to creativity. It might be helpful to get something done when there's a deadline, but it's not getting us into creative flow, and it's not getting us to a point where we've got our very best work. And the thing is that a lot of writing classes and workshops and these kinds of things out there have a similar model to what so many students do to themselves with the term paper, right? They've got a set due date. This is when your story is due. And that's sort of like accountability, but it's not the kind of accountability that then gets the writer into creativity. And so that kind of accountability is deeply entrenched with the feedback loop and how feedback works. And when we're doing that process, right, with accountability and the right kind of feedback, we're getting ourselves neuroscientifically into a productive creative zone. And that's when we're going to do our best work. That's when our best stories will be told. And that kind of thing, and I'm going to misquote a very famous author right now who said, you never have to erase what you wrote at 3 o'clock in the morning. If our listeners can give us a better quote of that, please do post it in the comments of this episode, because I've drawn a blank on who said that. But the point is that those inspired moments are gold for the writer. And what we want to create through the right kind of accountability and the right kind of feedback are more inspired moments so that we can do our very best writing.
That's fantastic. And I definitely think that, I've been witness to many of those inspired moments throughout our program. So it's really exciting to be talking about them today. And you talked briefly about, the person with the term paper due the next day and the kind of structure that leads to, that kind of rushed and hectic accountability. So which writing programs have you come across in your career that have the portion of the right kind of accountability that doesn't lead you to those stressful, gut-wrenching moments where you're trying to rush and not having the creative flow you need?
That's a really good question. And, I've been around the block a few times, and I've been to a lot of workshops, a lot of classes. I've participated in a lot of university programs and youth programs, adult programs, women programs. I've been around and done a whole lot of things. And I haven't come across a program that really gets accountability right. That really helps the writer to have the right kind of accountability. Now, many of them have due dates, and many of them will allow the writers to read or to share publicly or within the context of the group. There's certainly some accountability that's happening, but this is something that I took into account when I created a writing program was, let's step back, let's take a look at the neuroscience, let's take a look at how neuroscience is informing how our brain actually creates best, and let's create a program that's based on that, not just some random guess or some model of school that we've been doing, since the dawn of civilization. Let's break out of that mold, move past this old model of accountability into the kind of accountability that allows writers the freedom, the novelty that gets them into creativity and their best writing.
I love that. And I think that, what excites me about the writing gym and the accountability here is the fact that, when I'm meeting with the writers once a week, talking about their goals and, holding them accountable to the things that they want to do, the focus isn't on, how dare you not write those words you said you were going to write. It's more on, what happened there? Why did that happen? Let's talk about how next week your creative flow can be a better process for you. And that's really something, like you said, that, even in my limited experience with writing programs that I've ever come across, that kind of encouragement, that kind of support from a program was really nothing that I'd ever experienced before.
Yeah, and I think your observation there is spot on, and something that you just mentioned is the opposite end of the spectrum as far as, what does it look like when it's super stressful? And that's kind of like, that whip or that wet noodle, whatever it is that the instructor is wielding to say, how come you didn't get that done? And, you're late. And gosh, that's really, really stressful. And you're right. One of the things that differentiates the writing gym programs is that we're looking at the writer holistically. Who is this person? And how can we help this person to find the writer that they are and be that writer? And accountability and finding the right kind of accountability is a really important part of that.
So how do you think that the lack of accountability changes a writer's mindset?
Well, I think the most obvious is that when writers have no accountability, then the book just doesn't get done. Something has to motivate that writer to tell that story. So for some people, they're simply compelled. They've got an important family story, and it's really important that this message gets out into the world, or, they just happen to be born with a lot of gumption. However, without the right kind of accountability, typically what we've seen, and you certainly have been witness to this, is we end up with people who finish novels, but then they never get published because they end up in fear. We've seen a lot of those kind of people in conversations that we've had with writers who have finished books but just never get to the next step. And still to this day, based on phone calls that you and I have had following up with these people, still not published to this day. So the lack of accountability and the lack of support. And we think of accountability, I'm going to go back to what you said about get those pages done. We kind of think of that as the only model of accountability. And again, that's based on this really old school model that is antiquated, that neuroscience has shown time and time again isn't the very best way for our brains to learn and create. Yet we still have this paradigm of this is what it should look like. But if a program is doing its job well, it doesn't look like that at all. So we're really working to move forward into the next century, really taking into account how the brain creates best and to apply that so that writers can be successful. We don't want people to live their lives with unfinished novels, with untold stories. And certainly if publishing is their goal and living the author lifestyle is their goal, that's what we want to see them do.
Yeah, and you make a good point there when you talk about, the old model of accountability where it's, browbeating somebody into getting their pages done, or, essentially using discouragement and fear as a tool, toward getting people to do what you want them to do, whether that be, finish the next pages of their book or, whatever else it is. And to have a program that's so focused on how to master your fear, how to work through it, how how to have a better relationship with your creative process, as opposed to, kind of fear mongering of, get those pages done or this is never going to get finished and you're never going to be an author, and, that doom and gloom looming over them. It doesn't lead people into good productive space. And, never in my life, even with a deadline, have I produced something that I've looked at it and said, oh, this is the best work I could have ever possibly done. Because usually when there's that negativity attached to it, you have such a stunted moment where it's just, well, this is what is done. It's not great. It is what it is. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how, promoting this kind of view of a writer and approaching the writer holistically and trying to kind of figure it out that way and help them work through things is better than just, giving them a deadline and telling them to get it done?
Yeah, well, I think that your observation was spot on when it comes to that. And our listeners who are faithful listeners will recognize our recent episode with the New York Times bestselling author Brandon Webb, author of the new book, co-authored with John David Mann, who's been on our podcast multiple times, Mastering Fear. One of the things that was so interesting in my conversation with him, Andy, was that he is coming from a Navy SEAL point of view. And I mean, if you want to talk about somebody that we think about, drill sergeanting, I would think personally, Navy SEALs, that would be the place, someone's in your face, they're telling you what to wear, very strict and rigid. And yet he talks about his journey into exactly what you and I are talking about right here, which is knowing the time when we're reinforcing positively. It's called positive psychology. Our clients or our subordinates, if you're a Navy SEAL, into doing what's necessary to get a job done. And the really interesting thing for me about that conversation with Brandon was the intersection of neuroscience with the work that he had done, because he was coming from sort of a layman's perspective of having observed what had worked based on some other experts' advice. And I was coming from the perspective of learning from neuroscientists, their study of the brain, my own observations in the brain imaging lab to say, okay, this is the kind of reinforcement that really produces results. And it's funny because for so many years, not just schools, but many organizations have used fear as a motivator. And ultimately, there are moments when fear can be a powerful motivator, but they're farther and fewer in between than one might think. And knowing how to use those tools to motivate people is a really important part, as you know, of what we do to give people encouragement when encouragement is due, and to put on a little bit of pressure when that's the thing that needs to be done. And I'm going to go back to what I said just a little earlier about know the writer you are and be that writer. So you asked me about looking at writers holistically. Part of what we do is not only to look at the writer holistically, but to look at the writer as an individual and say, if we're going to help you to not only find the writer you are, but to be that writer, how are we going to support you best in what motivates you, in how you learn, in how you create best? What are those circumstances that we're going to create for you? And people have asked me in the past, what does it mean that your program is based on neuroscience? Well, this is a perfect example of an instance where I think, if our graduates or our current participants are listening, they're going to say, well, I had no idea that was going on all of that time. Like, what are you talking about? Because their experience is seamless. And they probably feel like, and I'm just making a guess and putting words in their mouth, that it was custom made for them, because it was. Because the way that we used the neuroscientific knowledge that we have really allowed us to look at the whole person as an individual and create within the confines of the structure of our program an experience that allowed them to be wildly successful and reach their goals. And that's why our graduates of the VIP program graduate with a novel finished. And that's why so many of our mastermind members graduate with a publishing contract.
How does the addition of an accountability program within a writing program help the author to become more successful?
Well, there are a lot of programs out there that have one or two or maybe even three elements of a quality program, but they're incomplete, right? And so what accountability, and more specifically what neuroscience allows us to do, is to have a complete program. It's not just that we show our writers about craft principles. We go above and beyond that, and that I am speaking with industry professionals every single week to add that market trending piece, to be in conversation with editors, publishers, publicists, agents, literary agents, lawyers who represent writers, the whole kit and caboodle to get that full picture of what's working. And then you add to that the accountability, the support, the holistic view of the writer, all of the resources that they have available to them, the private groups that we have where they're allowed to meet and talk and discuss. It's really the real deal, the full deal, the full Monty, is that what we can say? It really hits every single base of what would be important for a successful writer. And where does that come from? It comes from the end goal. The end goal is that our writers are people who want to live an author lifestyle. They don't just want one book or two books. They want as many books as they can. They want to get to a point where they're earning revenue off of their books, and that's supporting them. They want to meet their fans. They want to be able to tell their stories. They want people to be asking for the next stories. These are the things that they want. This is the program that supports them to get there.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Annalisa. I think that, this portion of the writing gym, the accountability portion, and, having someone to kind of gently guide you along the way and make sure that the work that you're promising is getting done, and making sure that you feel supported and have someone to speak to about the moments when you're not having the creative flow that you feel like you should be having, and working through those frustrating moments. And really having a genuine support system in place has really helped all of our writers. So it's exciting to talk to you about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
As a special bonus for this episode, we're giving away free copies of the 6 Secrets to Go from Struggling Writer to Published Author, in which Annalisa digs deeper not only to accountability, but many of the other factors writers need to become successful authors. Pick up your copy at www.datewiththemuse.com/6secrets. That's the number 6, followed by secrets. I'm Andy Brixey, personal trainer over in the Writing Gym, and we'll talk soon. Happy writing!